Hey there, healthcare humans. This is actually a little pre-recording before we jump into the full episode. Um, I wanted to just name, in case there are parts where you hear it, and in case you notice a couple like choppy bits, um, the internet demons were not on my side for this particular healthcare human conversation. And there were a couple of points where Zoom and also my internet were not in love with continuing to record. And so I just wanted to name that in case it's sort of obvious. You're like, well, why did they suddenly jump to a different part of the conversation? I hope it flows okay. I also wanted to just shout out to Vanessa Andreotti, the person I was interviewing, for being so patient with me as I waited for internet to come back to us. And yeah, I hope this is a really thought provoking conversation. Vanessa's work is really incredible. It can kind of hurt your brain at first, especially if you're used to thinking in the ways that we've been quite socialized and trained to think, both in just our regular education and certainly within healthcare. And I just invite you to let it wash over you and sift through whatever you hear for what makes sense, what seems to want to plant a seed. You don't have to like get it all, like whatever getting means. The whole point of how Vanessa offers education in general actually is for it to be very experiential and sort of peeling away layers and in a gentle way. So, yeah, I hope you find this conversation enriching and thought provoking. And thank you for your understanding if there are choppy parts. All right, enjoy the conversation. Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. I am a little bit starstruck and very honored to have a recent favorite author of mine here on the podcast live. I have been like watching and listening to you for the last couple of months, and it's very cool to actually be speaking to you in person. Why don't you introduce yourself, Vanessa?
Thank you, John. My name is Vanessa Andreotti. I am the author of Hospicing, Modernity, Facing Humanity's Wrongs and the Implications for Social Activism. And I'm also the Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Victoria, which is located on Plymouth and Songhees lands. These are two Lakwangan-speaking nations. I am of also mixed heritage. I identify as a racialized settler here in what's known as Canada, but I was born and raised in Brazil from a family who has two ancestries. One ancestry is German, the other is Guarani. So yeah, that's who I am.
That's who you are. Yes. And so I actually learned of your work from a friend of mine who also works in healthcare. And I've, as you may be aware, I've been having a lot of conversations of how do we remain human in healthcare, sort of the main way I frame the question. And a bit of that work always is like the bigger conversation of like, what are we doing? Like even just as a society, but keeping it even to the healthcare system and like what ways to go. I've in the past been a part of like trying to do local system reform, and then even now still are engaged in some conversations about it. And of all the different ways I've heard what we can do about this problem, the idea of hospicing modernity, like actually allowing parts of what we call society or the systems to have a natural death, I just find so evocative, especially as someone in healthcare. I'm a primary care practitioner. I actually provide palliative care to some of my patients when they require it. And so I think it's a really interesting frame and like metaphor slash reality that like I would love to explore with you. Um, I think as a beginning, I would love to hear what description or definition you would use around the word or the idea of modernity now, not as like a comprehensive one, but like what's your understanding of it at this point?
Sure. So I work with a research collective called Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. And in this research collective, what we try to do is to create educational and artistic experiments that help people expand both the ways they can think about things, but also the ways they feel and the ways they can relate to reality, or to different layers of reality and of themselves. So one way to explain what modernity is and that's one of the ways that I use in the book, is instead of asking what is modernity, is to ask who is modernity, and to treat it as an entity. Another way is to think about it as a combination of factors that create the conditions of the present. So in this way of talking about combination of factors, we use an image, the image of a house, to try to convey where we are at. So you need to imagine a house sitting on a planet, but the house is exceeding the limits of the planet. And the house has a foundation, and the foundation of the house of modernity is one where humans are separate from the rest of nature. So that sense of separability is imposed on us as a fact, and kind of alienates us from our entanglement and interdependence with the other systems of the planet. So if you think about a planet as a nested system, and if separability creates a sense of separation between humans and the land, we forget that our bodies are also land, and what we do to the land of the planet is also done to our bodies. So the sense of separability, for example, creates conditions where we create hierarchies between species, between cultures, between individuals, that then create cultural conditions for how we relate to both ourselves, to each other, to other species, and to the land itself. So that's one. That's just the foundation, is a foundation of separation between humans and the rest of nature. Then there are two carrying walls of modernity of this house. One carrying wall is the carrying wall of the modern nation state, which normally we think about, when we think about the nation state, we think about citizenship, and that the state is there to protect people, because that's the narrative of the state. However, if you look at the history of the modern nation state, it was created to protect property and property owners. So the state protects capital. And the protection of people through the dispensation of rights, like civil rights, labor rights, human rights, indigenous rights, it only happens historically, or mostly happens, when there is interest convergence between the protection of capital and the protection of people. When that convergence is not there, generally the rights are canceled. So it's just important to keep that carrying wall there, so that we do not idealize or romanticize the nation state as the savior or the solver of our problems. So the other carrying wall is a carrying wall of what you could call a single story of progress, development, human civilization. It is a single story of that creates epistemicides. It kills other stories. It projects itself as universal, as a form of universal reason. And whoever doesn't fit that story is considered to be behind the story and needs help to catch up and get on with the program, right? Which then reinforces the hierarchies that we were talking about before, that were created by separability. And then the last part of the house, which is the roof, is a roof that is then that sits on this other structure of two carrying walls and a foundation, which is today the roof of global capitalism, which is shareholder, speculative, algorithmic capitalism that seeks profit in a very specific way. But there have been other roofs, and there are other possibilities of roofs, like socialism is a possibility of a roof. But I think that what the metaphor of the house does is that it shows that socialism and capitalism are based on the same structure. Separability doesn't change, modern nation state doesn't change, and the universal reason doesn't change, right? We can change the economic system without changing the structure of the house. So the house actually offers a way of thinking about what we're facing as a wicked challenge, as a challenge. If we change something over here in one carrying wall or another, you're not going to be able to really tackle all this in one go. And so the story that we tell about the house that Modernity built is that we need to understand, number one, where this house is coming from and how it was created by expropriating resources from the planet and then putting its sewage back on the planet. We have to understand the dispossession, the genocides and the ecocides that are the underbelly of the house. And we need to understand that inside the house there's a lot of overconsumption to also try to fill the sense of emptiness that is created also through separation. And then understand also that in the expansion of the house would require more planets, because this house has already exceeded the limits of the planet. It crossed all six out of 9 planetary boundaries, according to the Stockholm Institute for Resilience, for example, in that right now we are in a crisis. The house is full of mold, it's cracking. The sewage of the house is already coming through the basement. We are seeing all kinds of crises, ecological, economic, social, mental health. They're happening inside the house. And then that begs the question, what do we do? And some people would say we fix the house, others would say we build another house, others say it's not a house is what we need, and other people say we need another planet or more planets so that we can continue exploiting and consuming at this rate. And what's important to realize at that point is that because we've lived within the house, our ways of thinking, our ways of feeling, and our ways of relating are still bound by those walls, right? So figuring out a way of sitting at the limits of this thinking, these ways of thinking, feeling, and relating, so that we can be taught by them is part of the hospicing process. So at this hospicing stage, we are sitting with what needs to be composted of what is dying, and we are not investing in its futurity. At the same time, we are repurposing some of the things that have kept it alive towards other possibilities, right? So that's the offering prenatal care for that which is gestating, but without suffocating the baby with your own projections and idealizations. So you can't tell the baby you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a she or a he even, right? You need to wait for the baby to be what the baby needs to be. And hopefully, if we have learned enough or been taught enough by the wrongs and the mistakes of the other system, there's a chance that what's being born is going to be wiser. But that all depends on how much we have had the discipline and attention and practice of staying with the trouble of what's dying.
Mm. Yes. The thing I really love about the story of the house is it's very clear, and like just like the foundation being the separability. I was just like, yeah, like just fundamentally, the rest is yes too, but like that, just like when we forget we are part of this planet and are deeply interdependent on it, and therefore the impact on the planet. And I mean the planet like literally, and also each other who are also part of the planet, like we are all each other. I just think that's so beautiful. I love the idea of, yeah, we don't need to know what's coming, because the instinct, that's modernity, I guess, is like, but what's the strategic plan?
Yeah.
Show me the map, show me what it's gonna look like, you know? But it makes sense to me that we wouldn't be able to know. So I'm curious, when people start to like, and also the thing I like about modernity just as an overall concept is that it's not like, see, capitalism the problem, patriarchy is the problem. Like those are all would you say system within?
Symptoms.
Yeah, symptoms. Yeah. And so they're the little slices, but sometimes then people start fighting about which of those is the real problem. Um, and so one thing that I also like that you've said, speaking of problem, is how when you view it as modernity and this big, you talk about a problem versus a predicament. And I definitely see in healthcare, like when we can see very clearly the impacts of this world on human bodies. We can see the impacts of how our system is like embodying modernity and how that's not working for the human bodies, and we go yikes. But because we also are doing quality improvement and like things that, I mean, there's probably a non-modernity version of that, but like we're approaching it in a modernity way. And I think a thing I see a lot is problem. Let's define the problem, and here's the one problem, versus recognizing how some of this is a predicament. So would you be able to offer what you mean by those two ideas?
Sure. Um, it's what you're describing in health. It also happens in education. So the education system is also in deep crisis.
Yeah.
And for example, what's happening in schools right now, there's a huge crisis in the profession with a lot of attrition, unprecedented attrition, and a lack of interest of new generations in coming to the profession, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it is about I would say it's a crisis of sense making about what's going on, but it's
Yes.
also a crisis of our capacity to sit with the reality and the complexity of this reality. So whenever in education, and that's why I'm talking about education, formal education has taught us, like modern formal education has taught us, to look at complexity and all the layers and then flatten them into one and impose a narrative of coherence and control. And then you police the borders of this narrative, right? So you edit out what doesn't fit, and then you're going to spend a lot of energy keeping that pressure cooker, yes, of that narrative of coherence. So this narrative of coherence is also kind of grounded in certain expectations of problem solving, of you describe reality, you predict, you intervene, and it gets you the results you want, right? And in that layer, maybe in one layer of reality, it works like that. So if you're building a plane, you will have to have that planning. But if you're building relationships, obviously that doesn't work, right? So if you look at all the layers of reality and the movement between these layers and the tensions between these layers, right? You cannot impose a linear path of change, but that's what you're expected to do. So you're between a rock and a hard place that, yes, I should be able to intervene and solve this problem, yet this problem can't be solved. And a lot of people take that as a burden, right? So not only the complexity comes to your back, you carry it on your shoulders, but also the sense of impotence before a sector that is crumbling or a society that is in destabilization mode. So part of the problem then is that if you look at things as problems, then there is a solution. There is this dream and projection of a solution. If you look at it as a predicament, it's something that you need to prepare to face constantly because it's not going to go away. And part of the movement to do that is to figure out a way to safely take this complexity out of your back and put it in front of you, and then safely lower it to the ground so that it can be collectively witnessed and processed. Yeah. And that process is education, right? And it could be health education, education of teachers, education, but that is a process of sense making too. That's why a crisis is a crisis of sense making, because we can't do this and put it down and collectively process something and not be afraid of the pain of it, because a lot of this processing is going to be difficult. We inherited a lot of unprocessed conflict and unprocessed trauma, both collective and individual. And modernity is not very good at this processing mechanism because it focuses a lot on a specific form of reason. And this specific form of reason, which I will call a narrow boundary intelligence, drawing on the work of Daniel Schmattenberger, it's a very, and this narrow boundary form of intelligence is based on either ors, right? It's based on teleology, which is there's a solution, there's a plan, there's a destination where we can all get to. And if I don't see that, I don't feel motivated to do anything, right? I can just give up. So part, I think, of what education can do, number one, is to move us from narrow boundary to wide boundary, but also to expand our capacity to sit with what's difficult and painful without feeling overwhelmed, without feeling immobilized, without feeling, without demanding quick fixes so that you can be rescued from the discomfort of sitting with what is not only, when we say it's complex, we are talking about moving layers of things and not about form. So everything is in a constant in between, and that in between creates an uncertainty that we are not trained to bear. We're actually trained to be extremely anxious about it, respond to this with anxiety. Yeah, so that's more, more or less. And whenever we talk about, whenever people get, whenever the idea that this is a predicament lands in the body of people, generally the response that I get, for example, is relief. Yes. Because they were blaming themselves for not being able to solve something that they thought was, that they could solve, right?
Yes. Honestly, that I think having that frame, and like just for like a lot of the delusions that we get socialized with in healthcare about even just keeping everyone happy, which is pretty tricky. Everyone alive, except for how that's not possible. Pain-free, that's tricky too. And there's something, so it's like, I'm going to do a solution. And it's not like we made it up, like it's a societal thing. Patients come with these expectations as well, and we're just trying to hold them. And then we feel like there's something, I must be a bad doctor. I must be like an insufficient, if only, and often the answer that I can recall and sometimes still feel, and I see a lot, is if I knew more, then I would always have the solution to what a lot of is predicaments that are coming to us.
Yeah, and how did we get to attach to that idea that it is solvable?
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And it is a conditioned thing. It's designed to be like that.
Yes. Yeah. And I actually do, like, I'm a faculty of McMaster University and teach family medicine residents. And I'm really very curious about, I mean, the work you do around education, because I mean, all of this actually is one of my experiments of education, if you will, of helping people to experience, I wasn't calling it modernity or whatever, but like, hey, what if can we hold some of these things? I'm curious, because so you hold like an official position in an official institution. How does that work? And you don't have to get into details, of course, but like, so do your meetings run very differently than the meetings I think of? Like, do you hold space for predicaments, or how does it go? Like applying this to the tension of, you must be met with many presumptions of modernity, or, people at different stages, at different parts of the house. If you like, how does that work then for you to hold this position, and how do you navigate that?
It's a very interesting question. So I decided to take against like all expectations in the circles, the research circles that I work with, which are circles around decolonial, indigenous, critical race theory. Nobody would expect that I would go in that direction, right? But I thought, in order for me also to, in my own inquiry of how this works culturally, I need to be able to be in a place where I can do it, or I can invite others to do it, or what you have to stay with the trouble, right? So I was at the stage of my career where I could say, I'm just doing research now. And there was enough for me to do, but I also found that without actually being in the most in the belly of the beast, basically, you also the stories you have to tell are only from the periphery, right?
Yeah.
So being in an institution facing the sector crisis that we're facing, not only with international students, underfunding, and different expectations being placed on the university, right? This is the time where the university is facing the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity crisis.
Yeah.
And in some places, there are cracks where precisely this way of approaching reality can help a lot, right?
Yes.
Can help
Yeah.
move things. It's not in every space, but generally it's the spaces where what used to work doesn't work anymore. Then people may be open to slightly different ways of doing things that then may get us to learn to relate in a different way, both to what's in front of us and to ourselves, right? So we've just had a very difficult period for all universities. Everybody's going through budget cuts, right? And that's the same in my institution. So with my leadership team, we were talking about how do we do this differently in a way that instead of creating the usual antagonisms, we actually come to the same side of the table looking at the predicament. And it is hard. A lot of people don't want to do it this way, or they think they do, but when it's actually there, it takes more time. It requires a lot of it's a different kind of care. It's a self-regulating and co-regulating thing, and it requires also a compass, right? So in our process at this time, the compass was a bowl. So we created a symbolic thing, a cultural artifact, which was a bowl. And in this bowl, we wrote down in pieces of paper the names of all the children under 17 who we knew, and we put it there. And then in the second round of writing, we put all the names of affinity groups of children. So for example, under 17, but we focused on Janae, under 17. So children who were queer, non-binary, BIPOC children, children caught in regions of conflict, children who were in hospitals, children who were facing mental health challenges, children who were very privileged and buffered from all of this and who would have to break the bubble, and that we know it's painful. So we put all there, and then we put another round of the children who were in that bowl, and also the non-human children who are part of the scenario as well, right? So there are children in other species that we're also accountable to. And we then covered this bowl with rose petals. Actually, and this was advice from a knowledge keeper in Peru. She said, like, just protect this with rose petals. And we took a picture of it, and we placed, because the bowl, in a week, the flower petals became old, right? So we keep the picture in the middle of the room, right? So that it is we invite these children into the room to guide our decisions, so that what we do today, they would find useful in 20 years. And that sense of intergenerational responsibility, there's no incentive anymore within the house, right? To condition it as a natural response. Our natural response is a narrow boundary intelligence response around the optimization of profit defined on self-interest, right?
Yeah.
We're not seeing ourselves as part of a much wider continuum where there are those who are coming after us. We are borrowing from them,
Yeah.
and our decisions are accountable to them. So that actually had a major shift, I think, of attention in accountability in terms of what we were doing. Because at points in this process, we had to make decisions about protecting the past or protecting the future.
Mm.
And in the
Yes.
hospicing thing, we would have, it's both, basically protecting so that the past has a dignified ending and the future has a beginning with integrity. It can't be a murder and a forced labor. It has to be a natural transition in that. And that it's very difficult to get both the cognitive, affective, and relational components of that in the right moment, right, for the institution. And for that reason, you need to be at the table. And I think there's something about my generation, the Gen Xers. We were the first to be told, go live your best lives, right? You don't have to worry. There's going to be prosperity for you and your children, which is not true, right? That generational contract has already been broken. But our generation didn't have to worry too much. Like there had been the Vietnam War, now the hippies became the adults. We were the ones in the 80s. Internet started in the 90s. So, and now we see ourselves in spaces where there's a generation before us who wants to pass a torch, but there's nobody here to receive it. And then there's another generation here of millennials coming in and saying, we want to burn this place down because it's already burning. And in this burning down process, we can easily throw the baby out with the bathwater because there's a lot of bathwater and the baby is sick. So how do we
That's so good.
figure out what to do in the middle of this when most of us are saying, you know what, I'm going to live my best life. And I don't want to be involved. I don't need to be involved with all of this. And I said at one point, well, we do. Because we are accountable to those coming after us. It's not just to ourselves. Yeah. So that's where.
So does it look like literally you're like, okay, timeline of sunsetting this program or this department, or like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, is it a little bit you start to adopt that language with each other? Because I could see that somewhat being helpful.
You can. It is an interesting, so to change a culture, it can't in this way. It's not an individual leader at the front. It's going to be a whole community at the back, right? That can do this work. So figuring out how to negotiate expectations and help people to walk without having that goal and the idea of what it's going to be in front of them is scary. Like scary for most people. It's an adaptable way that requires you to be very, very it's not self-aware in the sense of guilt or shame. It's a self-awareness of how what you're doing contributes to the movement of what's happening around you, right? So you have to lean on the motion of things rather than on the form of things. So a lot of people expect, for example, from a BIPOC leader, they expect grandstanding gestures, right? So if I don't do that, I'm a weak leader. But this approach requires a lot of work in the background and the backstage, and requires actually for me to get out of the stage, right? To allow other things to flow. So you only see the result probably when there is a crisis. Then you see that the possibilities have expanded significantly, without you even noticing that this was happening before. So it's not, that's why it's difficult even to articulate a plan for it. There's no, you have to be present to what's going on and have the ability to bring bring people along with you.
Yeah.
Right? In a way that they feel they are part. They are both insufficient in themselves and indispensable to this process. And what I've learned from Indigenous communities too, and in this process in particular, when I asked for advice, what I was told was trust the invisible to make the impossible possible.
Oh my gosh, that is so
Which
great.
was super interesting. And then it makes you wonder, right? Like, okay, what is invisible here? And probably the invisible is this repair of relationships, right? And not only the relationship with the bowl, with the different generations, the relationship with the accountability of the university towards the wider ecology that we're part of, which includes the sector in crisis, which includes the fires and the floods, and the conflicts and the famines that are happening around us. So how do we sensitize people to this much broader range of accountabilities without it feeling heavy and overwhelming, right,
Yes.
on your back? And in order to do that, and I think we're hungry for that. We're hungry to be able to look at it and hold it collectively together. And for that, we need the sobriety and stability to be able to do that in an environment that is completely unstable. So more or less talking about, like, if we're going to have another metaphor, would be the eye of the storm, right? So how do we reach the eye of the storm, which is a place where if you walk too fast, you get caught in the vortex. If you walk too slow, you get caught in the vortex. You need to be walking with the storm. And in order to do that, you have to have a different relationship with the storm and see the storm within your body as well, and find that eye of the storm within you.
Yeah.
In your nervous system.
Yeah, it's a pacing thing. Especially like speaking of like, yeah, the individual overwhelm, at least a bit of it is because we then immediately think we have to personally have all the solutions to the problems, and we are so disconnected from each other. Like the notion of everyone, you can look at a predicament a lot clearer if you're not alone looking at it and not thinking you're now the savior of the thing.
Yeah.
And then the pacing. Oh, it's so good.
And figuring out how there's a part of we have a course called Facing Human Wrongs, but there's a part of the course where most students realize that thinking of themselves as, they use the word insignificant, but in a positive way.
Yeah.
So in the house, we have to be great or
yes.
we are trash. So there's the +1, you're either +1 or -1. There's no zero and no positive attributed value to zero, right? But seeing yourself as insignificant takes away the burden of being this great, exceptional thing that needs to be exalted all the time, and often in empty ways, right?
Yeah.
We do that just to especially in Canada. Everything is amazing, everything is wonderful, it's not working anymore to produce the confidence, right, that is required. But I think in this context, there's also the part about certain perceived entitlements within the house for your self-worth. So in the house, you need to be in a position of moral authority. You need to be in a position of, and this moral authority is about arbitration of justice, law, common sense, health, right? And that these two things, the arbitration and the authority, gives you a sense of unrestricted autonomy, that your autonomy is the most important thing, and it is unaccountable, like you can do whatever you feel you should do without thinking about responsibility and restraint. Then there's this affirmation of virtue, that you have to hear all the time or affirm to yourself of our innocence and purity. And that's then connected to the saviorism thing too, right? That you go out and you're the hero. And these are all burdens. So they're perceived entitlements. But right now, in a VUCA context of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, they become liabilities, right?
Yes.
Because if you approach this context wanting these other things, authority, autonomy, arbitration, affirmation, you're going to be in a circular move, right? That is the tunnel vision, the narrow boundary thing. So partly, I think in education, we need to bring people into a wide boundary, which is understanding the different layers, taking off safely that pressure cooker of the coherent narrative, and seeing themselves, reality, and language in a diffractive way. So diffraction is about kind of opening up the layers of things and seeing the different colors of things. So the first thing is to see ourselves not as coherent, Cartesian, self-transparent individuals, but as an ecology of different responses, right? So we use the metaphor of the bus within us, where we ask people to imagine their bus of different passengers with there's somebody driving, but it's not always the same person. And then there are passengers at the front talking very loudly, passengers in the middle talking sometimes, and passengers at the back who you don't even know because you've been repressing, right? And sometimes the passengers at the back decide to hijack the bus and run over other people. And by doing this, I think there's two things that happen. Number one is that the moment that you start to be present to your own complexity, immediately your capacity to sit with the complexity around you increases.
Yes.
Right? Because you're not projecting only this tunnel vision. It's either what I identify or don't identify with. The spectrum opens. The second thing that happens, I think, and I'm in conversation with the work of a psychiatrist who talks differently about the right and the left brain, and he really complexifies things because it has become pseudoscience, but he brings it back to the fact that in healthy societies, the logical part of the brain is in service of the relational part of the brain.
That's good.
So
yes,
there are parts of the brain. So there are parts of the brain that would go with the motion of things and metaphor and imagery and movement, basically. And there's a part of the brain that is focused on form and on control and certainty and fixing. And they're all important. We have different tasks that need to combine these things, but Western societies have not paid too much attention to one of these parts. So, for example, putting children in schools for 5 hours sitting behind a desk is not conducive to developing the parts of the brain that are relational and based on a different, like that can trigger a different neurochemistry. So, for example, being outside and observing things and developing both solitude and patience and a different form of communication with the land is one of the things that could nurture this part of our neurobiological system that can hear and communicate with what's around us, and that is also part of us, right? So that's the idea of sensing your body and embodying your body as land, rather than thinking about it as a concept. Right? So if it's just my body's land as a concept is very different. You're addressing
experiencing it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about it as a concept, it's the part of your neurobiological system that is logical, that is trying to access that experience. If you're doing that with your body through the relational sides and parts, you have a neurophysiological experience that is very different. But it's also something that is much more open to the uncertainty of this movement, right? So there's a part of us then that wants the certainty, control, coherence, and concepts to relate to the world through concepts. There's another part of us that is capable of an unmediated relationship with reality and a very different response to uncertainty that is not anxious.
Mm.
So back to education, that is part of education too, to create a different neurophysiological experience of the world that is not shutting down to motion, mystery, uncertainty, and also the violence that is in pain that is happening, right? So I think a lot of people who want this other experience tend to idealize nature and say, okay, I just want the elation. But our our experience of and as nature is actually quite painful, especially because of what's happening. So a different experience and relationship with pain is extremely necessary right now. And as you said before, we are within the House of Modernity, the narrative about well-being is well-being that is pain-free.
Yes.
And probably pleasureful.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the pain and pleasure thing there are very specific. So figuring out a way of relating to pain as a teacher, for example, and understanding pain as a response that is part of the ecology and inevitable in a lifespan, right? And having teachings that allow us to relate to pain differently, to relate to aging differently, to relate to death differently, is extremely important if we're going to be able to assist with the birth of something new. Otherwise, every time we try to think of a different house, it's going to be the same comforts and same presumptions about the body and land that we had before, just with different clothes, with a different aesthetics.
I'm curious, have you either personally or have heard of forms of medical education using some of these concepts that you're talking about? Or I've read the term probiotic education, which I think is interesting, but like really playing with this sense of things. I think it would be very valuable. So I'm just curious if you've heard of folks doing that already.
I know a few folks who are trying to bring this concept. It's not, you see, I go back to the same. These are not concepts, these are practices. Because if we're thinking about concepts, we're already putting it in a box. Yes, I know a few people. I could put you in contact with a few people who I know who are trying. We are very much in the beginning of figuring out how to create a different neurochemistry of education. So our current education is very much based on achievement mastery, which metaphorically I would say that it's good to associate it with dopamine. So it's dopamine seeking. And if you're thinking about exams and rankings and all of that, this is all about that. Now, if we're thinking about a kind of probiotic education, it's not so much about mastery or achievement, but it's about learning to process stuff, both individually and collectively. And instead of thinking about the right answers and achieving those, you're looking at collective epiphanies that happen through inquiry and curiosity and figuring things out with each other and going through the pains and the motions that you need for that kind of relationship to happen, right? For that kind of collaboration to happen. And it's a collaboration where you see yourself as both insufficient and indispensable. So there's kind of a kind of unconditional regard for you being there, but it's not about proving anything to anybody. It's about engaging with something that is important for the whole, right? That has also implications for your accountabilities towards the whole. And it is, it's different. both in its design, because it's
Mhm.
not asking what's the answer at the end of the book, the end of the book, right? It's
Right.
asking how do we hold the complexities of this predicament together.
Yes.
And I remember when I saw in your podcast something about you seeing yourself as the other human in the room, right?
Yes.
Which already asks you to take a step away from the usual, like fixed identity. I've got this sorted and it's already in a box, and I have my tools and going into the field, to one where there's an interaction in front of you, an interaction of the ecology of the body that is land, that is you,
Yeah.
and of the ecology of the body that is land, that is in front of you,
Yeah.
and how one ecology is already related to the other, and relates to the other through also systems that are there, like the land is there, but then there's also systems that are human created that are harmful right now, and we're trying to interrupt or repair harm in this interaction, in the effects that manifest in your body.
We're talking about like the metaphor of, well, our freaking human bodies out of which we are practicing medicine, apparently. And so that's why I actually think healthcare is a really interesting sector. Like, it's very fascinating what has happened to us that makes us so um separate from our humanity and our biology, when that's literally what we learned, or like a version of it's what we learned.
Mhm,
and and yet it was learned in a non-experiential way, which I think is
mhm,
a piece of it. um but there's an opportunity, because like the cracks are so large in healthcare, and at least in my opinion, especially with the pandemic, the cracks can equal opportunity if we want to, because they're quite
mhm.
staggering. It's not great, but that's what happens, I guess, when things are dying, as we've learned.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's so interesting to consider, whether it's from the education standpoint of like how we shift medical education, but even each of us who are in healthcare, of like offering ourselves or finding spaces like your course where we can shift our own lens, I guess, or, shift our own orientation. Um, and what that would do, not only just for, I think, what our bodies are asking us to do. Like, we may actually feel better, but not in a way of like, so we can pretend nothing's wrong, but we can feel more coherent with our humanity. You know, I think that will feel resonant in a lovely way. That's my personal experience as well. I feel, as I grow more intimate with complexity, and I love your like analogies, like metabolizing the shit and stuff, like really like metabolizing and just allowing, and a lot of it's nervous system slash emotional regulation, or at least that's a
Yeah.
very helpful skill as a piece of it.
Mhm.
I find that I can hold more complexity as I remove what I think is my entitlement slash pressure to be always affirmed, to always be the expert, to be adulated in a powerful way. As I remove those in like the room with my patient,
Mhm.
it it becomes a good time with patients. Not all, but it becomes easier to have an act like the ecosystem can more easily flow, because there's not these crumbling walls that are just getting more absurd,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. No, it is super interesting to think about both educate teachers and health professionals as frontline workers, right? So
Yes.
I'm thinking about, like, if we're thinking about the house within you, the infrastructure of the house within you, right? There
Yeah.
is an infrastructure that the house has created and imprinted. It was designed to be like that, so that you could live in that house and produce value in the house. That is crumbling with the house. So what I find is that if people allow themselves to see that the problem is not only here, it's a reflected problem. So climate change is not outside you, it's inside. So imagine there is a nervous system of humanity,
Yeah.
right? There,
Yes.
humanity as an organism has its own nervous system. So when you are with somebody in the room, that nervous system is actually a co-constitutive, right? And
Yeah.
then this co-constitutive nervous system is part of larger nervous systems too, but let's just focus on ours for now. If you think about the patients and the children as canaries in the mine too, right?
Yes.
Together with
Yes.
the frontline workers saying, how do we deal with this? These are the first professions who will need to open it up, to open that narrow boundary up as a matter of survival.
Yes.
Right? There's no way that within the narrow boundary intelligence that you have been conditioned to operate through, there's no way that through that intelligence you'll be able to do your work. Either you go to wide boundary or you quit. And in wide boundary, like just complexity, it helps a lot, and it invites other ways of reasoning. So we are looking with my research collective, we're looking at 4 ways of reasoning that are indispensable for this move from narrow to wide. So one is what we talked about, diffraction, the diffraction of the self. So learning to see the different layers of reality without flattening, both within yourself, in reality and in language, understanding that whatever you say will have multiple layers of interpretation.
Yes.
And then there is abductive thinking too. So instead of inductive and deductive, abductive is a form of reasoning that foregrounds uncertainty and is not afraid of it, right? So you will need to use that, and we need to train practitioners and researchers and scientists to work with that. The third one is analectic thinking, which is about, so within modernity, we're taught dialectic thinking. So there's a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis, and it follows a linear progressive logic. In analectic, you take a step back and you see, like, these are choices that are constructed, right? So you're looking at how come these are the choices we have and not others.
Yes.
Right? So you're deconstructing that linear progression, and you're deconstructing the choices that are placed in front of you, including choices of relationship. So why is it that in a relationship between doctor and patient, there needs to be this hierarchy? And it's not just why, and when is this hierarchy maybe generative?
Yes.
And when is this hierarchy not generative? It's not about either or. It's about both and more and moving. And then the last thing of the 4 is diachronic reasoning. So you know that there is an assumption or an idea in front of you, or a type of relationship in front of you, and you can trace back where it's coming from and forward where it's going to go if you continue with it, right? Yeah. And here you then have more choice about correcting course. And understand, in all of this, and the diffraction too, is about, in that room where you're seeing yourself as the other human, you're also seeing the other layers that are there, that some of them are systemic, some of them are historical. So I was in the doctor yesterday, and I went for an x-ray, and I experienced an interaction that really, in that room, that I could see the things in the room, and I could see it triggering in me all the memories that I had of similar interactions, and then triggering all the questions that came up. And the whole day I had to hold the interactions. It was a 30-second interaction of a father who was not allowed in the x-ray room, and who was suspicious of the competence of the technician, who was not white. And I was there thinking, there's nothing I can do. As another patient, I saw another health professional try to come and de-escalate the problem. But I could see in me, like on my own bus, all this passenger going, no, that's why you don't like going to the clinics. That's why sometimes you don't report your problems. And then part of me thinking, in other situations, is the person who I'm going to be in front of value me as a human being the same that this person values other people? And Or now is this person going to be upset about what happened and then take it out on me because I'm also not all these things started to bubble up. And it was this kind of education that I was trying to apply to me that got me to another space of self-regulation, saying, okay, I could see this is good data, right? It's still there. The chain of trauma got activated. I could see the memories, but I managed not to allow the flood of emotions, right, to drown me in that moment. I had to. It's not compartmentalization because you are still seeing everything happening, but you can. It's a way of swimming through or navigating through that that asks in your level of accountability for compassion to be the first response, both in terms of what like the chain of memories, the person, the technician who was taking the x-ray, and the father, right? And the child who was also part of the picture. So how do we, because I think without that compassion and generosity, which is not incentivized within the house, what will happen is that we will turn on each other.
Oh yeah.
There's no like, and this turning on each other will take many different forms, and the most extreme would be shooting your neighbor, right? But the microaggressions, they're also a symptom, and they also are lethal. So in the long term, so thinking about colonialism or the house itself, you can think about it as a machine that bulldozes over things, or that makes a supermarket to make it palatable to bulldoze other things. Or you can think about it as a disease. And in that sense, we are all health professionals dealing with our own ailment and contamination of a disease of separability, of sense of superiority, and this the sense of disconnection and alienation from the land, right? So that this umbilical cord that we have with the land, with this planet, and the planet has with the cosmos, without this center of belonging, and without this being the glue that connects us to each other, right? Then we are left with only human constructs of identity and belonging that are not doing the job of bringing people together right now.
No, the opposite.
And are creating this enormous weight on our collective neural circuits, right? And creating a very dangerous situation for humanity as well. So, yeah, figuring out how to get out of what kinds of antidotes we have, and seeing ourselves as part of the disease is extremely important, because otherwise it's back to separability. I'm healed, you are not, kind of thing.
Yeah. Who's found the solution? Like it, we don't want any of that. It's just not helpful, because we are
it will require a lot of humility.
Yes. Yeah. And ultimately that does bring relief, though. Like when you really, it just does, because it's not actually fun. We get so incentivized to hope we can be the shining star or the savior or the helper or whatever. But then it's just lonely and empty and a lot of pressure. And then we start, like, one of the classic things that is like, we start turning, say, on the people we are paid to help. So like we get resentful or frustrated with our patients, and then we feel bad about, etc. Right? So it's like it can just bring it down. It makes our job easier, truly. Like, I'm putting in quotes because it's not like now we're this women, but like it is easier than trying to hold up a crumbling house. It just is. To be like, actually this house is crumbling. That is easier than thinking you have to hold it up.
Yeah. I think that you're right. It gives you a sense that that form of independence and autonomy are actual liabilities for you. We need to do this together. There's no way.
Yes, thank goodness.
And there is no formula or quick fix. It's going to be us figuring out as we walk this.
Yeah,
Okay? The
that's
path is made by the walking.
that's so lovely. Thank you so much for your time and for navigating the internet demons that came to us. Where can folks find your work if they want to explore these? I don't want to say concepts, these ways of knowledge. Where could they find those experiences with you?
So we have the Hospicing Modernity is the entry point into this work. There is a course also called Facing Human Wrongs, Climate Complexity, and Relational Accountability that is offered through the Continuing Studies faculty of the University of Victoria. It's a 6-week course. And if you're ready really to explore this in depth, the course is a huge ask. But it doesn't tell you what to think or what to do. The ask is to go deeper and figure out for yourself what you need to do in your context. And there's actually there is a version of the course that has been adapted by climate psychologists who wanted to focus on health and wellness. So it's going to be up in the summer, this specific version, and they are going to be the ones hosting it. There's that course in the summer, and there's also another book coming up with exercises called Outgrowing Modernity, where we talk a lot about the move from narrow boundary intelligence to wide boundary intelligence to wisdom, to relational wisdom. And this is work that is also part of a project called the University of the Forest, which is a collaboration between many different groups, but led by the Hunikui people of the Amazon and their own practices of education and health, taking the forest as the university.
Okay.
It's super cute. It's a very beautiful project.
I'm also I love trees. I have a tattoo. Anyway, I'm just immediately interested in that. That sounds incredible. Okay, great. So I'll put some links in the show notes so that people can follow. I guess so. A last thing before we part is thinking of the folks that are listening who are, some of them actually are teachers, as I understand, if they are still listening, but most are folks working in healthcare, physicians, nurse practitioners, midwives, all sorts. What's something you'd like to say to them? What's coming to you that you'd want to share with them?
Hang in there. I think one of the things we need to be thinking about is to collectively expand our capacity to have the stomach to face the shit together and compost and metabolize, so that we don't, in facing this, the stomach, so that we don't always throw up, throw a tantrum, or throw in the towel, right? So we will need to figure out a way that sustains us in this process. And one of the things that we found in our collective is that joy is super important, and that this we learned from also the indigenous communities in the South we work with, who have been in this struggle, in high intensity struggle for a long time, and survive, right? So the importance of accountability for sure, and responsibility, especially intergenerational responsibility, is extremely significant in this, but joy too, and figuring out ways of it's joy and rest are two extremely important things. So not allowing the sadness that we find around us take the whole space. It's important to process the sad, but this processing needs to be done collectively. And to find joy in composting and hope in composting.
Thank you so much for all of your time. I so appreciate it. And for all those listening, I will talk to you next week.